Last year there was a lot of discussion about corruption in football. In this video I'm going to look briefly at the role of agents in football transfers in England, and in particular whether the current regulations are fit for purpose, particularly in terms of preventing corruption in football. The existing regulatory framework was introduced in April 2015 by the Football Association and was entitled the Football Association Intermediaries Regulations. Intermediaries is basically FIFA speak for football agents. These regulations were a result of FIFA's decision to devolve the regulation of agents to individual associations like the FA. Let's look at three parts of these regulations in turn. Firstly, only registered intermediaries can be used by a club or a player. In order to become registered, the agents must have a valid contract with the club or player and lodge it with the FA within 10 days of being executed. How this system works in practice has been called into question by those working in the industry. Over the last year, there are reports of numerous contracts being registered for one player and that the FA does not even review the contracts prior to accepting them, leaving the door open to unscrupulous contractual arrangements and a real lack of clarity over actually who represents a particular player. Secondly, where previously agents had to pass an entrance exam in which only 10% passed, the new regulations allowed any individual to become a registered agent for an initial fee of £500 plus VAT and a yearly renewal fee of £250 plus VAT. Agents who have been in the business for many years prior to these regulations have questioned these rules, arguing it degrades their profession, removing any real barrier to entry and allowing anyone to enter the profession. From the outside, having such little oversight and light touch regulation in such a fast-growing and increasingly lucrative industry does seem to leave the door open to corruption. In addition to the fee to be paid, there is also a good character and reputation declaration which applicants must sign. This declaration, amongst other things, declares no unspent convictions and that they have not failed a CRB check. However, although the FA can sue applicants for fraud if they sign the declaration despite not fulfilling the criteria, it does not actually prevent unfit agents from entering the profession initially. In short, it's reactive. Personally, it reminds me of something like self-certifying mortgages prior to the credit crunch. By the time the error is found, it's too late and the damage has already been done. Thirdly, the regulations recommended a cap on agents' fees of 3% of gross contractual income or 3% of the actual transfer fee involved. On the face of it, you could argue this caps excessive agents' fees. However, what is the point of the regulation if it is not actually binding? And even if it was binding, then it may not be enforceable, being akin to price fixing and a restriction of trade. Also, is fixing fees a good idea? Could that not lead to agents finding other ways in which to make up the shortfall and thereby actually increasing corruption? So what needs to change? Firstly, I think a fundamental problem with the system at the moment is that individual countries have different regulatory structures. Given how international football is, both in its appeal and in the cross-border transfer of players and coaches, surely global bodies like FIFA should be leading on these issues, not as they did in 2015, devolving it to individual associations. Taking the FA as an example, which I did above, the rules are clearly inadequate. There needs to be a proper independent regulatory body for intermediaries which has a thorough accreditation system both at the point of entry into the profession and then an ongoing monitoring from that point onwards. If you look at any other industry with large amounts of money involved, there is a proper regulatory system to ensure good practice. Football, like other sports, has a regulatory structure which reflects its amateur roots and does not fit with its relatively newfound status as a multi-billion-pound industry. Given this, is it any surprise that corruption is seemingly so prevalent? Whilst other industries have had generations in which to hone and develop a proper regulatory structure, football needs to put this in place very quickly, otherwise it risks undermining the product which has made it so successful. As a final point, often new regulations are met with despair and consternation in the industry involved. This is familiar to solicitors who dread every new announcement from the Solicitors Regulation Authority. The feeling that comes out of it is that essentially regulations only make life more difficult for those just trying to do a job. We need to resist this notion in football and put forward a clear case that a proper regulatory system for intermediaries will allow the overwhelming majority to get on with their work legally. And it will ensure those who don't play by the rules are rooted out of the industry. If you're interested in reading more about this issue, please have a look at the update on my blog, which looks at a recent court case that touched on a number of the issues I have mentioned in my video.